Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Turner, and I'm the Managing Director here at Risk New Zealand. Welcome to our first lunchtime seminar of the year. Our lunchtime seminars are run most months, and they remain one of Risk New Zealand's most popular events. I would like to thank and acknowledge the support of Risk New Zealand's partners who make this possible. Our premier sponsor is Marsh. Our key lunchtime seminar sponsors are Safety Associates and SAI Global. Our lunchtime seminar supporters are KPMG, Navigatus, Christchurch City Council and Watercare. Today's Risk New Zealand Lunchtime Seminar is being delivered by webinar only, just because of the latest level changes with COVID-19. I ask that all venues and participants keep their microphones on mute, but please feel free to type questions straight into the webinar platform anytime during the session. Now on today's topic, what I wish enterprise risk managers knew about cybersecurity. It is my great pleasure to introduce you all to Ahmed ElAshmawy. Ahmed has more than 22 years of experience in the ICT industry, specialising in information security consulting for the past 17 years. He has held security leadership roles in critical national infrastructure organisations and led various industry initiatives. He's an expert in implementing standard-based approaches to information security in a practical manner to ensure they support businesses' objectives while complying with internal and external requirements. Ahmed's experience extends across industry sectors including government, healthcare, financial services, media, energy, and telecommunications. Welcome, Ahmed. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. I hope you are going to enjoy this session and that you'll get out of it with something useful. I just want to start by acknowledging everyone that is in Auckland. Thank you all for taking the burden of the lockdown of all of New Zealand. You've definitely been through more than all of us have been through. All right, let's move on. Well, I guess I'll have to start with a quiz. Feel free to scan the QR code on your screen or visit menti.com and use that code for the quiz. You'll find that the quiz is locked for now. I'll unlock it shortly, but it's not really a quiz. It is just a poll, basically. So there is no wrong or right in this. I just want to get your viewpoints on how things are managed in your organizations. So while you get ready for that, let me give you a bit of a brief about Axenic. So I'm the consulting practice lead at Axenic Limited. Axenic is a consultancy based in Wellington and Auckland. We do have services for the government's risk insurance. We do a lot of work with the Government Chief Digital Office. We also do risk and privacy consultancy. We have recently become a PCI DSS QSA. That means that we're authorized to help and certify organizations against the PCI DSS. We also do a lot of work in the ISO 27001 space, so help organization get certifications, ISO certifications, and we've recently got ours as well. We do some security strategy and DevOps support for some organizations. We also do enterprise security architecture and virtual CISO engagements, as well as help with the implementation of some security programs. So that's a quick about, and let me first start the voting on Menti. Now, you should have the voting open, and for some reason that add-in is showing an error now, as it cannot connect, but you should be able to see the first question, the main role of the security team in cybersecurity. The main role of the risk team in cybersecurity risk management is, and I can see that people started responding. I do have 3 people responding as risk mitigation, 1 responding as governance. That was supposed to show in front of you on the screen. That's fine. So 4, 5. Good. I'll keep it for another second. All right. So far, I'm sorry you're not seeing the beautiful picture I'm seeing on the other computer screen. I have had 5 people respond as risk mitigation and 5 people respond as risk governance. None of the people responded as risk assessment. Great. Let's move on to the next slide. All right. Now you should be seeing the second question, the main role of the ICT team in cybersecurity. Risk management is. So you can start responding to those. Awesome. I started seeing people responding to those. Great. ICT team, all people are responding to risk mitigation. Some people are now responding to risk assessment. Good. 1/3 of the people believe it's risk assessment. 2/3 believe it's risk mitigation. Now, 13% think it is risk governance as well. Great to see those changes. I'll keep this up for another few seconds. Some more seconds. Here we go. Getting more responses. Great. 1 more to go. All right, so what I'm seeing in front of me is that 67% of the respondents believe that it's risk mitigation, 22% believe it's risk assessment, and 11% believe it's risk governance. All right, moving on. Next, the main role of the security team is, and feel free to select all that applies. So these are services within cybersecurity that we will discuss shortly, but feel free to select all that applies. Sweet, results are coming through. Awesome. Great. As I said, there is no right or wrong. It is what it is at your organization. What I'm hoping is that at the end of this conversation, this presentation, this webinar, you will consider what fits your organization best. So let me brief you on the results I'm seeing so far. So I'm seeing 23% of the respondents respond as their role is risk management or compliance. 18% respond as assurance, 14% respond as operations, and 11% responded for governance and architecture. Let's move on to the last question. And the last question is about the main role of business in cybersecurity, risk management. And I can see now that I do have a spelling mistake in business. It is not. Oh, okay. So an add an error is the only thing that you can see. I completely understand. For some reason, this didn't work. If you want to go to menti.com menti.com, menti.com, and use the code. Let me get to the slide that has the code, or just scan the QR code on your mobile and respond. Let me get back to that slide. Here we go. You can just use that URL and code, or scan the QR code and respond. All right, I'll give it another 30 seconds. Sweet, more answers are coming through. Awesome, a lot more people have joined. Sorry about that. Add an error. There's something about casting this onto Zoom that broke the link, but it's definitely working otherwise. Good thing we had that handy, the code. All right, more people are responding now. Great, let me go quickly through the results that have been submitted so far, or there are more coming. Okay, 36% of the respondents have chosen governance, 31% risk ownership, 19% acceptance, risk acceptance, and 14% provide funding. As we said earlier, there is no right or wrong. It is something that fits the context in which your organization works. It will be different for government from private sector. It will be different depending on the size of the organization and what you do. All right, I'll move on to, it started loading some of those slides. Too late, but it did start loading some of them. All right, so here is a spoiler alert. What I wish enterprise risk managers knew about cybersecurity. So I'm just gonna spoil the whole webinar for you right now. So there are 4 simple things. Cybersecurity is not a technical problem. It is a business risk. It is simply that. Opting for, well, those geeks in the corner that fiddle with computer keyboards and mice will sort it out. It won't be sorted out as a business risk if you opt for that. It's just related to other operational risks. So as simple as any of the other operational risks you may have in your organization, as financial risks, as any other risks that you have in the organization, cybersecurity is just another operational risk. And you basically manage it the same way. So if you manage it the same way, how hard would it be to just simply integrate it into your enterprise risk management as you do for all the other risk areas? It's really simple to do that, and we'll show through this presentation why this is valid. The only caveat that you need to consider is that rating scales need adaptation. So things like health and safety risks that could happen in a year as a highly unlikely event. The rating scales for cybersecurity can be as low as a month, or even low for a highly likely thing to happen. Things that won't happen over 5 years, for example, means that you're most likely going to change your ICT infrastructure, and accordingly, your whole risk profile will change over that time. So especially the likelihood scales are quite different for cybersecurity, so consider that. And the impact scales as well could be different. So, for example, if you're using technology in control systems to manage manufacturing facilities, for example, then cybersecurity risk can have a flow-on effect on your physical environment. All right, this was the spoiler. Don't just take my word for it. Let's move on and see why am I saying I wish you all knew this. You may know it already, but I come across some people within the risk management domain that don't necessarily see it that way. So let's move on. So risk is the flip side of opportunity. Businesses see opportunities, risk people see risk, and hopefully that works. That is the type of risks that we see. People see this as a beautiful room. We kind of see the hidden threat in there. That's just what we do. Most of the businesses don't really like bad news. All right, so if this is what we do as risk professionals, let's see how does that fit in the bigger picture of cybersecurity or information security services. So this is just a high-level overview of the cybersecurity or information security services. So there is the normal governance, risk, and assurance, compliance or conformance, and security architecture, and then there is the security operations. Let's just start with the governance. The governance itself interacts with risk management because it outlines the governance around actually practicing risk management, whereas the risk management has a role in defining the governance requirements. So if you identify a risk that needs a policy or something to manage that risk, then basically what you need to do is define those requirements as part of your risk management practices and implement the governance controls required for that. Risk management also informs the requirements of assurance. So you know what type of assurance you need depending on the controls you put in place to manage risks. It naturally influences the security architecture because you will define the architecture of your environment based on your risk profiles and on how you want to manage your risks. So if a service that contains sensitive information bears a lot more risk, you might want to bury it inside, limit the access to only internal people rather than a service that needs exposure to the external world. Your risk management also defines the requirements of security operations. So within security operations, we do things like firewalls, anti-malware, intrusion detection systems, all the geeky stuff that happen within the security realm mostly happens within the security operations domain. So as you need those as controls to manage your risk, they fall within the security operations. And this is actually what your ICT team would be doing. So ICT teams would be running anti-malware, the configuration management of your computing base and so on and so forth. I do have an expanded version of that diagram detailing all of the services under each of those sub-services of security. So please reach out if you want a copy of that. I can send it to you later on. I'll have my contact information at the end of the presentation for that. All right, let's go through the cybersecurity risk management process. So basically, someone in the business says, help, I need security work, or within the government, certification and accreditation. So these are the works that involve identifying risks and doing assurance on those risks. And as soon as you get that, you start initially consulting with the business, trying to find out and identify what exactly are they doing and what type of work they need from you. Then you roll into the context side of things. So plan and scope the work that you're doing, kick off and schedule when you will be doing it, and do the context workshops, the business and technical context workshops, and do the risk and controls workshops. Now, whether you do this internally or engage an external provider, it's up to you. This is basically a model of that caters for both. It's up to you to decide whether you do that through your internal team or engage an external provider. The outputs of that would be things like the GCDO 105 questionnaire if you're a government organization, security risk assessment, a privacy threshold assessment, and maybe a privacy impact assessment that will help you analyze the risk and identify the controls that are required to manage those risks. You move on from that into the development, acquisition, maybe if you're buying a ready-made service, and integration and testing. So basically you put a risk management plan together and a system security plan. A risk management plan is at the objective level of the control. System security plan would be at the detailed level of the specific settings that you need to set to secure your services. So we'll pretty much think of the risk management plan as the what do we want to achieve, and the system security plan is how are we going to achieve that. And the outputs for that are going to be things like security risk management plans, system security plans, and probably vulnerability scans, penetration testing reports, and so on. That, of course, needs to have a system built and developed in order to be doing that. The security tests, especially the penetration testing, are a nice control to significantly kind of look at and analyze. You move from that into the assurance phase. So you do a control validation plan and audit. So basically plan how you're going to run your assurance exercise, run the actual assurance exercise, come up with a certification report, certification memo. Again, these are mostly government terms, but you want to get an output that is more or less similar in commercial sector as well. So basically you want some formal form of evidence that your risk is managed so that you can present that to your stakeholders. You finalize that by closeout of the engagement and then plan a follow-up audit at a later stage, and then the system can operate and hold live data and provide the services to its constituency. So the outputs of those two phases would be basically control validation plans and control validation audits, security audit reports, remediation plans for risks if you find that some controls are not well put in place and the risks are not remedied, and a system security certificate or some form of a memo that explains that this system or this service could operate and provide services on behalf of the organization or host organizational information or its customers' information. All right, now this is like the cybersecurity view of the word. Let's compare it to the enterprise view of the word and see if both could be integrated. So whether you're using COSO or you're using ISO 31000 as your enterprise risk management framework, it doesn't matter. As you all know, they eventually map to each other. So basically, the internal environment and the objective setting kind of map to the scope and criteria and context. Things like the event identification, risk assessments, and risk response mapped to the identification, analysis, evaluation, and treatment. And as you can see at the bottom of the slide, the same steps from the previous slide of cybersecurity risk management just are mapping exactly to that. And then you have the risk treatment phase and the recording and reporting. So you come up with the right reports for that at this phase. And then the continuous monitoring and review, that's what you get out of the assurance and communication and monitoring and review in the previous slide. So as you can see, those two, let's say enterprise risk management in general and cybersecurity risk management, pretty much map to each other. So it's not very difficult to integrate them. In fact, they are naturally integrated. Cybersecurity risk management is naturally integrated in enterprise risk management. It needs to be treated just like any other operational risk that you have there. Now remember the issue of scales that I talked about at the beginning of the presentation. Risk scales are not always fit for purpose. So here's an example: health and safety and strategic likelihood scales. These things, the likelihood scale of impacting a strategic objective of the organization spans over a longer period of time, whereas cybersecurity events can happen, their likelihood can happen over a much shorter period of time. That's just the nature of technology, which is an enabling factor for cybersecurity risks. It definitely provides a lot of opportunities, but as you all know, opportunities always come with risks. Service delivery and legal impact scales. I've seen some organizations impact scales lacking the legal aspects and the service delivery, or even those that have the legal aspects might not have a lot of considerations for things like privacy, for example. From a technology perspective, we care a lot about the service being developed to its end users. So we need to ensure that service continues to be delivered. And we need to make sure that in our risk impact scales, we consider things such as the legal impact, such as the violation of the Privacy Act 2020 in New Zealand, if you're providing services in Australia as well. So you need to consider the violations, impacts of the violation of the Privacy Act, Australian Privacy Act. And if you're providing goods and services and or services to the European Union, you need to consider things such as GDPR impacts. So just consider how you map those to your existing impact scales as well. Reputational scales. Now, with technology taking a lot of visibility, especially those customer-facing services, reputational scales, when it comes to the compromise of a technology service that is specifically one that is exposed to the outside world. However, other technology services. So I've just read this morning, for example, about a ransomware incident on New South Wales Rail Authority. And it was interesting that the ransomware attack was not actually a ransomware in the common sense that we know about. So they didn't really encrypt their terminals and devices, but they held their information at ransom and threatened to release it if they don't pay the ransom, release it on the public, on the internet, basically, if they don't pay the ransom. So the reputational impacts that come out of a compromise of a technology service may be quite different from the reputational impacts of other operational risks. So consider those as well when you're looking at your impact scales. There is also the aggregated value and compound impacts. So as I noted before, things like control systems that manage operation in an industrial facility or in a power facility, those could have health and safety impacts. The compromise of those could have health and safety impact and could be life endangering if they're not taken into consideration. So that's a compound impact of a cybersecurity risk. There's also the aggregated value. So you may have various services or systems that are of a relatively lower value to the business. However, the compromise of those systems could lead to the compromise of more important systems within the business, just because those lower value systems integrate with higher value services in the business. So consider all of those when creating the risk scales for cybersecurity risks. It just doesn't add up as a physical or another operational risk. All right, so we're coming close really to the end of this. I was hoping that we would do this in person, and I was hoping for far more interaction than this. So, but good, we'll have more time still for questions. So, as I said before, what did I wish enterprise risk managers knew about cybersecurity? Again, reconsider those points that we talked about at the beginning in light of what I presented in the past few slides, and let me know what you think. Also reconsider the questions that I've put together in the poll at the beginning of this presentation, and think about whether your organization needs a change in the roles and responsibilities, or is this a good fit for what you do? I'm ready to receive your questions, and even if you have questions after this session, feel free to either find my email in our contact page, ping me on LinkedIn or on Twitter. I'm active in all of those media. Questions? All right. No open questions up till now.
Into the Q&A platform now. Thanks.
All right. Interested in the link between cyber risk and the enterprise risk management register. Can you go into this? Sure. So cybersecurity risk, as I know that, is just another operational risk. You can look at the risks of individual systems and services, but you need to have an approach to roll those up into the enterprise risk register so that you can manage them at the enterprise level. The way I would do this is by looking at the individual risks that impact services and systems, find out what's common. So I don't know, let's take a very simple risk, the risk of a service catching up malware because files are being uploaded to that service, and that could result in either disclosure of protected information to unauthorized users, or basically the system being or the service being unavailable, or information being modified, or the system being used as a platform to stage other attacks. So this is a risk. It could impact individual systems and services that you employ at your organization. You will identify that risk against each of the services. Some of the services would have lower value, and accordingly this risk will be rated at a lower impact. The likelihood may or may not be the same depending on other drivers that could give rise to the likelihood of that specific risk for that specific service. That's why we're saying context is the king. And then basically, once you identify that across multiple systems, you need to roll it up into the enterprise risk register. So basically, write that risk up in the enterprise risk register, select the highest likelihood and impact that that risk has been rated at across all your services, and put that out there. In a lot of cases, I've seen organizations put things such as somebody hacks our system and service and things go wrong as their only cybersecurity risk. Now, that is not very helpful. Just remember that the reason we are identifying, analyzing, and evaluating risk, the main target is to manage that risk. So roll it out in a way that enables you as an organization to manage it. All right. Shall we go to the top of the list again? All right. I'm not quite sure what your conclusion advice was in relation to the below. The Menti question, the scales, are you suggesting having different scales or different weightage on likelihood and impact? Okay, so the Menti questions, as I said at the beginning, there is no right or wrong. I was just teasing out from the audience, how do you distribute roles and responsibilities in your organization? This may be different in different organizations, depending on whether you're a public or private sector organization, depending on the services and basically the business context of your organization. You may want to distribute the roles and responsibilities differently. Again, it's just teasing out what people are doing so that others could learn from it. So there is no right or wrong there. The scales, I'm not suggesting having completely different scales. I'm just suggesting having mappable scales. So as I said, a likelihood of a health and safety risk that could basically, you start the scale at something that happens every year as a highly unlikely, whereas in a cybersecurity risk, you would put something that happens every year as more likely. All right. Aggregated value and compound impacts. Can you explain with a simple example? All right. So let's say we're having, actually, I do have a very good example for that. So you may be aware that there was once a virus that hit oil and gas companies in the Middle East called Shamoon malware. So this virus basically deleted the master boot record, which is like an important part of any computer, and basically paralyzed some of the corporate operations in oil and gas companies in the Middle East. The way that virus reached those target systems was through the oil and gas companies catering services. So because they do have catering services, there is a system there so that you can specify the catering requirements for large meetings, for example. Because that system was integrated with the corporate system, it was mainly available for the caterers, but integrated with the corporate systems. So that in itself is a low value system, but its integration with the company calendar, for example, and email systems meant that the risk that affected the catering system affected the rest of the corporate systems. So this is like a real life example of an aggregated value. The compound impacts are where a risk could impact not just the cybersecurity life, but could really transition into the physical life. As I said, industrial control systems are very good examples of that. All right, next question. How do you nudge the conversation away from just discussions about technical risk to include business risk? It is just about engaging the right stakeholders and audiences. Also about finding ways to educate the business about IT risk and IT teams about business risk. That's a very good question, actually, Steve. So yes, there is definitely a massive disconnect between technical teams and business people. So when technical teams start talking about patches and vulnerabilities, firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and all those geeky terminologies that the business really don't understand them, it just becomes really challenging for them to get what the IT people are saying. Same thing, the IT people really believe that businesses keep talk about revenue and cost, but they don't get what the technical teams are suffering. So absolutely, there is a disconnect. Absolutely, educating both parties is quite important. However, it is also quite important to recognize that security is not the core of the majority of the businesses. So at Axenic, yeah, security is our core business, but in most of the other organizations out there, security is not the core of their business. So security does not need to become a roadblock for the business. Security really needs to be a trusted advisor that will tell the business, this is the risk that you're facing, this is the requirements to manage this risk. Now, if you want to fund the risk mitigation, happy to do it. If you don't want to fund the risk mitigations, then it's up to you. It's your business risk. We're doing this for the business. IT is building IT systems so the businesses can achieve their goals, not the IT goals. So the onus falls on the business to actually be accountable. They are accountable for the risk management at the end of the day. All right. All right, so Paul is asking, I always have had problems understanding the thresholds between IT risk and ERM. To what extent risk managers should incorporate IT risks into the firm-wide risk register? At this point, I'm just monitoring those that can impact the organization in a strategic way. However, I understand that IT has hundreds of risks. That's true. It is quite difficult. I think the most important thing that we all need to realize in businesses in general, as long as we depend on technology, there is a minimum level of understanding that we should have about technology. I know it could be challenging for a lot of business people, However, it is just one more thing that they have to learn a little bit about. At the same time, our IT people need to understand how to bridge those gaps. The best approach is to make sure that both sit together, IT people and business people, and come together to a consensus on the best way of managing this. IT people are outlining the risks or identifying the risks and rating them, because at the end of the day, they want the business support and funding to manage those risks. The business want to identify those risks in order to be able to basically take a decision on what is the best bang for buck for our money and investment in this space. So the answer to your question is basically you need, as risk managers, you need to moderate between both teams, make sure that the IT team are outlining their risks, but not to the nth degree that makes it impossible to the business to understand. And when they do outline those risks, they outline them in business terms. So for example, our website having a vulnerability means nothing to the business, but our website having a vulnerability that enables an attacker to vandalize it and accordingly have massive reputational impact on the organization's business. That is something that most businesses will relate to, will understand. Now, again, consider that the reason we are identifying risks and evaluating them is we want to manage them at the end of the day. So we want to make sure that the IT risks identified by the IT people are aggregated in a way that makes it, one, digestible to the business people, two, manageable at the end of the day, since the target is actually managing the risks rather than identifying it. All right, any more questions? I've gone through all the questions so far. Any more questions? So on the screen, you have my contact information again. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions at any time that pop up in your mind. I'm happy to help and answer those at any point in time. Just a second. Oh, thank you very much. So I'm happy to answer any questions at any point in time. So feel free to connect or reach out if you have any questions. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you all and thank RiskNZ for arranging this webinar, and hopefully next time we'll meet in person.
I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Ahmed for your presentation. I think we have all learned a lot today. Thank you everyone for taking the time to join us today at this lunchtime seminar. This webinar has been recorded and we will send out this recording plus the presentation to you in the next couple of days. If you could check the mailers for more upcoming events, and don't forget to register for our RiskNZ conference next month. If you aren't already a member of RiskNZ, we would love to have you join us. And if you know anyone who would like to join as a member, please encourage them to do so. We'd like to cater for all our members and potential members. If there are any topics or speakers you have in mind, please get in touch by email and we would be more than happy to have a chat. Thank you once again for everyone for being here, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you at more RiskNZ events soon.